The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
It is 7 minutes after 8. Welcome to the Forum at 8 here on SAFM, South Africa's news and information leader. Well, as we've been saying, some analysts in the mining sector have called on more platinum producers in this country to consider shutting down more shafts in order to bring the oversupplied market into balance. Now, platinum miners in South Africa, which is the world's largest supplier of this metal, have repeatedly warned that this year is going to be very difficult and that they are struggling with high costs as well as safety stoppages. Aquarius became the first producer to stop an unprofitable mine, but analysts have been calling on other miners to suspend loss-making mines in a bid to cut global platinum supply and also restore prices here. This morning then we're looking at what is being done in order to deal with this matter, because on the at least the effects of all of this, people are talking about serious potential for job losses. How do we ensure that this doesn't happen, but also how do we make sure that this industry is sustainable? Would like to hear your thoughts about this on 0891 104 208. That's our line. We'll be taking calls a little later on. 0891 104 208. But also you can send us an email this morning at gwalax@sabc.co.za. gwalax@sabc.co.za. SMS is at 34701 34701. Let me introduce my guest then on the program this morning. Let me start with Mr. Peter Leon. He is the head of Africa Mining, Energy and Projects at Webber Wentzel. A very good morning to you, Mr. Leon.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Nice having you again on the radio this morning. Thanks indeed. Also joining us from our Pretoria studios, Zwelicha Tansi. He is the NUM National Education Secretary. A very good morning to you, Mr. Tansi.
Good morning, Xolani and the listeners.
Thanks for coming through again. Thanks indeed for coming through. Here with me in studio, Lee McMaster. He is the head of the Sustainable Development at Solidarity. Mr. McMaster, nice having you in the studio.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for your time. Let me start with Mr. Peter Leon. I saw a quotation. Somebody says South Africa, when it comes to these things, is at a crossroads at this time. One is specifically talking about the platinum sector. Would you say that we're at the crossroads?
Yeah, very much so, Kalani. I mean, the fact is, I think we have a perfect storm going on in the platinum industry at the moment. You've got escalating costs. You've got a platinum price, which is basically where it was 2 years ago. And you have an oversupply situation. Now, in that situation, the things you have to do, one of the things one needs to do is to cut costs. And you need to look at where those cuts have to happen most effectively. The other thing, I think, to look at, maybe that's when we come to the solutions, is, how government could come best to the party. I do have some ideas around that. Maybe we could talk about that as well.
No, we certainly will in a minute. But how did we come to where we are, firstly?
Well, I mean, there are two reasons for that. I mean, obviously, the platinum price is an international price. In that sense, South Africa's a price taker. It's not a price maker. Secondly, energy costs have doubled over the last 2 years, and labor costs are very high. I mean, there's something like 50% of the production costs. So, you've got all those factors happening together, and then the other thing is the industry went through quite extensive expansion over the last number of years. So you've got too much capacity, you've got a static price, you've got escalating costs. So all of those things are really a recipe for a problem.
Because I think what confuses a lot of us is we're the biggest producers in platinum, and we should have a competitive advantage in this area.
Yes, but well, I suppose we do. I mean, we have 80% of the world's platinum production comes out of South Africa. But I mean, platinum can, as I understand it, be substituted by palladium, which is produced by countries such as Russia. Zimbabwe is also a platinum producer. But I mean, clearly the fact that we have 80% of the world's supply does give us an advantage. But I mean, there are serious, local endogenous problems with the industry which need to be fixed.
Let me bring in Zwelicha Tansi. Why are we in this position as far as NUM is concerned?
Xolani, there are a number of issues that are contributing to this situation. First is a Eurozone crisis. And secondly, there are also a number of factors that Peter Leon have indicated, like one, we are the price taker. We don't determine price for the platinum. And secondly, the electricity is also part of the contribution. Yeah.
Anything to add for your part, Mr. McMaster?
Much has been mentioned by Peter and Ecliffe. I think the productivity issue is certainly in front of everyone's minds. To try and make the mines more productive. And there you also have issues around labour stability. You've got other issues in terms of the recent state intervention in mining sector report, the SIMS report, as referred to, that does not create confidence with investors in terms of the state's role going forward in terms of the mining sector. So that was just some of the other points that was raised by various companies in the week.
I know that there was a meeting on Monday, but I would like you to talk to a little bit. One of the issues that you've raised, you talk about labour stability.
Yes, just in broad terms. I mean, we have seen what has happened in the specifically the platinum industry over the last 2 months. We've had numerous strikes at the likes of Impala, etc. And that has a lot to do with new unions that want to enter the fore, and is not part of the established unions such as the likes of the NUM and Solidarity. And that has also created a huge amount of problems in terms of lots of revenue at some of the companies. I mean, you have Impala Platinum that declared about a 2.6 billion rand loss in profits due to that industrial action. So it is a concern when you have these less mature unions with more militant tactics, if you could call it that, that tries and enter the fore, whereas you have the more responsible unions that try and create that sustainability in the sector.
Mr. Nancy, surely that should worry unions when workers are seen to have created or at least contributed to this kind of instability.
What we want to clarify, Xolani, is that we mustn't confuse militants with violence. We are more worried about violence, not about militants. We are very worried, and we think that the companies must take responsibility for what is happening at Impala. More worrying so is that when workers are forced to join the union and are forced not to go to work, as NUM, we will never do that.
All right.
And we
but
don't
you
do
see,
it.
I think the implication, or at least we get a sense that this is simply about the Implat strike, and other people are saying, well, it's been going on for quite a while. There's been instability around labour relations in this sector for a while. What do you say to that, Mr. Tanzi?
The instability you are talking about must not be confused with the protected strikes, which are normally in the industry.
Maybe it's that normality. It's the fact that strikes are normal is abnormal, but it's by itself.
No, let's correct this. We have never had a sector strike in the platinum, not at all. You would have the sporadic strike, but protected strikes, and at the same time, you are able to contain the situation. So, to me, that is not an issue. But the worrying factor is the new development of violence. That is worrying to everybody.
Mr. Leon, the labour relations issue?
Yeah, I certainly think it is a problem, and obviously, I mean, if people have been talking about the Implat strike, but I think it is an issue in the industry. I mean, the Impala situation obviously had a huge impact on South Africa's GDP, and indeed on mining production in the first half of this year. And certainly that makes a difficult situation even worse. And labour costs, something we haven't really talked about, are an issue in the industry. So, I mean, I think if we're talking about how we can try and address these problems, one of the ways one would need to look at that is how one can have some sort of pact which would, keep the cost of labour at a reasonable level. So
all right. I'm going to ask the unions.
I'm going to
ask the unions what they think about that. But let me ask you about the issue of production and implants in particular, Mr. Leon, because it's quite ironic. There was no production for about 3, 4, 5 weeks.
Yeah, I think it was 6 actually.
Yeah, something like 6 weeks, and therefore one would have imagined there would be problems of supply. But we're still talking about oversupply.
Yeah, no, we are. But, I mean, the fact is that where it had the knock-on effect is that it affected because it's such a major producer, it affected the platinum production in the industry, and affected mining production as a whole, and then had an effect on South Africa's, on the contribution of mining to GDP.
But how did that happen? It affected supply, right?
Yes.
But why then are we still talking now about oversupply as being one of the reasons why the platinum sector in general is in trouble?
Well, that's the reason that's been put up by the analysts, but clearly Impala is a major player in the industry, and so obviously that had an impact on the industry in general.
Labour costs then, Mr. Tanzi?
This labor cost issue must be analyzed and be put into a correct perspective. I do not think, and we do not think as NUM, that is having a major issue. Because if you look at the bargaining level, the chunk of our members, a small chunk of the cost goes to management, not to our bargaining level. So to us, it's not an issue. They are just using it as a scapegoat.
Are they? Because they talk about the issues of break even, that they are barely breaking even these mining companies here.
And you must understand, Xolani, that these are negotiated costs, negotiated salaries. We don't impose to the employers. And in most cases, when we reach this agreement, you'll find that they are the compromised position. Therefore, they cannot use that as an excuse.
And again, here with me in the studio, Mr. McMaster, let me read here, because they say that, for instance, if you talk about the break-even, the industry's break-even level has been climbing steeply for the past 5 years. In 2008, the break-even platinum price for most mines was about 1,100 ounces, $1,100 per ounce. It is currently probably much closer to $1,600 per ounce, meaning most mines are running pretty close to the edge. The issue of labor costs then?
Well, Xolani, in terms of, if you just look at actual costs in terms of labor, you must remember conventional mining is very labor intensive. And, if you take the remuneration of workers, the lower earning workers typically are still earning around 4,000 Rand, per month. And you still have the issue of, just the outflow of artisans out of the industry still indicates that there's a problem with scarcity of skills, trying to retain those skills. So, in terms of the cost, I think it's fair, in terms of the climate, to have that cost associated with labor.
Because what happened, Mr. Tanzi, again, I don't know if you recall, with SACTU in the Western Cape in particular, the clothing sector, where there were problems, but there was an agreement between the industry and the unions that at least the entry level be cut by at least 30%. Is that an acceptable deal that can be struck within this industry?
We also had the same arrangement in one of the chrome mines in mining, Samanco, for instance, where workers took a cut in terms of the wage increase. We are not unreasonable. We are mature unions. We assess the situation and we come to a fair conclusion between the employers and the employees. It's not just we are imposing these negotiations. We analyze the situation thoroughly and come to a 50-50 kind of arrangement.
All right, Mr. Leon, you're hearing from the unions. They do not think that that's where the solution lies.
Well, I think it's something that has to be addressed. But look, there are other things that need to be done. I mean, we've touched on the issue of energy costs, which have doubled in the last couple of years. That's an issue which needs to be looked at. But then, in terms of how we can make this thing work, and obviously platinum is a huge contributor to the mining industry and a major source of employment in the mining industry. I think probably 40% of all the mine workers work in platinum, a figure very close to that. I mean, it's how government can come to the party, and I know the Solidarity spokesperson touched on the issue of the Sims report, but which we can come back to. But the one thing is, which one I think needs to be looked at, is back in 2008, 2009, when government was looking at introducing the Royalty Act, they actually put it off for a year because of the global financial crisis, so it was only introduced a year later. And I think that might be one way of addressing the problem, that is to reduce the royalty rates currently imposed on the platinum industry. And that's obviously something the Treasury would have to look at.
All right. But talk a little bit about how the investors feel about the Sims report, because I thought that they would have settled their nerves. I mean, before the Sims report, there was this issue about nationalization, but clearly it's not part of the Sims report.
No, well, look, I mean, at that level, the Sims report has settled investors' nerves in the sense that the Sims report comes out unequivocally against nationalization. But the problem, Kalani, is that in relation to the platinum industry and mining generally, it proposes a whole lot of measures which would severely put the industry back. And what I mean by that, it's proposing a resource rent tax of 50%. On all commodities, I mean, platinum being one of them. It's looking at export duties on strategic minerals, which includes platinum, infrastructure tariffs, and a whole range of fiscal measures, which I think would severely harm the industry. And I think, bearing in mind that the ANC policy conference starts next Tuesday, those issues need to be looked at, and the policy conference needs to look at the fact, can it look at imposing all these huge tax increases on an industry which is really struggling and could really put the industry underwater?
To what extent are the problems in the platinum sector perhaps also reflecting problems just generally within the mining sector, Mr. Leon?
I think they're emblematic of the problems in the mining sector, but they're probably most acute in the platinum sector because of all the, as I said at the beginning, the perfect storm of labour issues, energy costs, strikes that have happened in the industry, which other elements of the mining industry haven't had quite the same exposure to. But the issue of costs and energy costs, of course, are true throughout the industry. And the question is, costs are rising, prices are remaining static, and something has to give under that situation.
And also there are issues of innovation. Is the industry innovative enough to not just rely on the catalytic converters and the exports to Europe and so on? Mr. Leon, I'm going to come back to my other guests.
Well, I mean, one of the things the platinum industry is looking at is fuel cell technology, and you've seen the work that Anglo American has done around that with the prototype vehicle, and clearly that could be an amazing development if it actually took off. I think the industry is innovative as it can, but clearly, I mean, you touched on the situation in Europe and the use of catalytic converters. Obviously, those are used for motor cars, and if the world economy tanks, there's going to be less demand for those things. So, we're a part of a globalized world, and we need to realize that.
All right. So what I'll do also is open the lines here on 0891 104 208, 0891 104 208, and we get more comments. Also, you can send me a text message this morning at 34701. Of course, at stake here, serious potential for job losses. What do you think should be done? 0891 104 208. Let me just quickly go to Mike in Newlands. He's called this morning. Mike on the line, good morning.
Table and save these mines.
Hello. Yeah, Mike, you're on the radio. Good morning.
Hello.
Hi, Mike. You're on the radio now. Good morning.
Good morning, Scolani.
Hey, hi.
Scolani, here's my quick input there. I'm just concerned. I'm not hearing from the gentleman from the union as to what contribution they intend making to this. I mean, this is going to be a calamitous situation, and I just, as a citizen of the country, and knowing employment being so important, and wages being pegged at 48% was quoted earlier. Even if it's 40%, it's way too high. It's totally out of sync with the rest of the country. And I just feel the unions are not being aggressive in assisting the mines. They seem to be sitting back and waiting for something to happen. And then the other thing, and I just want to comment on that comment that the gentleman from the union also made about negotiations. I had a factory with well over 150 people. I had 3 unions fighting employing staff. And although we did reach a settlement, as an employer, I had to reach a very unhappy settlement because I had to keep the factory going. So yes, I know you say the unions love to say we'll negotiate, but sometimes the employer to the mines.
All right. Mike, your line is really, really bad. Perhaps let me just start with Mr. McMaster. How would you respond to what Mike has just said about the role of unions in assisting here?
Well, just briefly, I think what we as the more mature and established unions in the industry do is we participate in these task teams to really look at the sustainability of the platinum industry. In terms of the labor costs, we know it's about 50%, but as I mentioned earlier, in terms of conventional mining, that's just the figures you look at when you go and mine. So it is a very labor intensive industry, and as I said earlier, if you still look at what mine workers are being paid at the lowest levels, it's fair to say that they are adequately or fairly remunerated at this stage, and having increases such as 8 or 9% is still fair in terms of the remuneration levels.
All right, here's an SMS. Perhaps, Mr. Leon, you can answer this one. Somebody says, energy costs did not double. The increase is doubled. Mines waste energy. There's a huge opportunity for energy efficiency.
Well, I think mines are practicing energy efficiency as much as they can, but we all know what's happened with the electricity price, even as a private resident, how those prices have gone up in the last 3 years. So, I mean, energy has a huge impact on the mining industry. I think that's the fact.
A couple more SMSs, perhaps also, Mr. Leon, you can respond here, because somebody says, miners are very complacent with inefficient mining processes and engineering techniques, get sophisticated equipment and upskill people. Also, Marion Rustenberg says, how much profit do the platinum mining sector wants to make? More than maximum. Talk about this inefficient mining processes and engineering techniques, if you may.
Well, I'm. Let me say on that score, I think the mines obviously operate as efficiently as they can because they're in the business to make profits. It doesn't make any sense to run a mine inefficiently using outdated equipment. And I think mining in this country, in many respects, particularly if you look at the deep level mining that goes on here, is a world leader.
In terms of technology, I'm not sure if unions have a view on those issues, Mr. Dancy, about the efficiencies.
Xolani, I think mines are trying to be innovative. I recall in 2008, one mine was using mechanized mining somewhere in Limpopo, but it was found that that mine was more expensive than the conventional mining because what they did, they imported that machinery to South Africa, but the cost of maintaining the machinery was much more expensive than the conventional mining, to an extent that they were forced to return back to the conventional mining. So the mechanized mining is also not the solution. But what is important as a mine stakeholders is that we really need to sit down and make sure that we find better ways of mining.
Okay.
Going back to the question which was posed by the gentleman from Cape Town, as what are we doing as the unions to assist to cap the job losses in the mines? On Monday, we met as a mining industry, especially in the platinum sector. We look at a number of factors. One area that we looked at is a problem of we are not beneficiating the mines. Okay. I mean the platinum.
All right. You know what I'll do, Mr. Dancy?
Yes.
I'll ask you to just tell us a little bit more about that meeting in a minute. But I need to just get the last word from Mr. Leon. He has to go now.
Okay.
But that last word will also come in the form perhaps of a comment on one of the issues that we haven't touched on, Mr. Leon, and that's the issue that the mines have been complaining about, safety stoppages. Do they have a point there?
Well, I think they absolutely do. I mean, it's affected a number of the mining companies, the Section 54 stoppages over the last couple of months, and it seemed to me that the stoppages were happening in a very ad hoc and rather erratic manner. The whole mines or shafts were being shut down. That clearly has complicated the picture. I have to say, it seems to me that now the Department of Mineral Resources have realized that the way in which these stoppages were implemented was seemingly quite arbitrary, and I think the problem has abated, but it clearly contributed to some of the ailments that the industry suffered from over the last 6 months. And as you know, the Department of Mineral Resources have now set up a task team under the MIGDET process to look at this issue. So I think there's an awareness in the department that there was a problem and that the problem is being attended to. But certainly before that happened, it was an issue.
All right. We'll talk about the meeting of the MIGDET that was on Monday. Nonetheless, we thank you very much, Mr. Peter Leon, for joining us at this time. All right. Peter Leon is Head of Africa Mining, Energy and Projects at Weber Wenzel. He has to go.
The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
Well, we're talking about the crisis within the platinum sector in this country. Of course, thousands of jobs on the line, serious potential for job losses. What should be done? What sort of interventions are you going to suggest? There's somebody actually, KB, who says, isn't the timing of this crisis just too perfect? Just a few days before the ANC's policy conference, suggestion for government to reduce royalties already cited. KB, very suspicious about the timing of the crisis. All right, we'll hear from my guest in a minute, but let me go to the lines and then get more comments here in the studio. Dr. Gavin is a political economist at the University of Cape Town. Dr. Gavin, good morning.
Hi there. Yeah, actually, it's Dr. Gavin Capps. I'm a research fellow at the University of Cape Town. I'm a political economist, and I work in the platinum industry.
Thank you very much for your call. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Okay, well, thanks for giving me the opportunity, Clarny. Actually, I think the point that you just read out is quite a good one about the idea of a crisis being whipped up before the policy conference, and I think in a kind of way, Mr. Leon, who's now left the studio, made the point quite well. Not as he intended to, though. There are 3 points I would like to make.
Yeah.
The first is what we're not looking at here is actually the longer-term view. And the longer-term view of most platinum analysts, including within the industry itself, is actually that the future of the industry is pretty bright. Oh. Because what they're looking at is the continuity of the Asian boom, and that the Asian boom weathered the storm of the 2008 financial crisis. There's a belief, perhaps over-optimistic, but there is a belief that it's going to weather the current European crisis. And if that is the case, then the platinum market is going to continue to grow because the Asian car market will grow. Platinum is used in about 20% of consumer durables, and of course the white metal jewellery market is going to continue to grow as well. Yeah. So that's the long-term picture, and actually it's been on an upward curve since the mid-1990s. Rather, what we're looking at perhaps is a short-term blip. A short-term blip which is just connected to the peculiarities of the platinum market in Europe. And the peculiarity there is that platinum, more platinum than palladium, is used in the catalytic converters, which are used in diesel engines. Diesel engines are a much higher percentage of the European car market. That's where the problem is. But we still shouldn't forget that South Africa accounts for 30% of world's palladium production as well. The two metals are actually mined side by side, so it's doing pretty well out of palladium demand too. So that's part of the picture on the on the demand side. On the supply side, what isn't being talked about, and I disagree actually with what's been said in the studio, is I'm not so sure that South Africa is a price taker as far as the world platinum market is concerned, precisely because South Africa does account for 80% of world production. And indeed, that 80% of world production is dominated by a handful of very, very large companies. The largest of those, Anglo Platinum, accounts for a massive 40% of world platinum production. We can think of few other industries in the world where you have a single corporation accounting for that much of global market share.
Effective monopoly.
Absolutely. Now, if you combine that with Impala, which makes up most of the rest, and Lonmin, which makes up practically the remainder, what those companies do absolutely influences world price. And the long-term strategy of Anglo Platinum and its predecessors, going back to the apartheid era and actually to the beginnings of the industry in the 1920s, has been to control the rate of global supply in order to manipulate world price and in order to ride out the fluctuations in the commodity, which is what essentially we have at the moment, a short-term, potentially longer-term fluctuation. So when it's Anglo Platinum's partners, in this case Aquarius, who have started talking about cutting back, Anglo Platinum, as we know, is reviewing its operations. I wouldn't be surprised if it does start holding back. The reason being is that it's sat on the highest value platinum reserves in the country, and it wants to ensure that it makes maximum profits for those. I expect it's going to hold back on supply. It's going to force the world price up again when it becomes more profitable, it's going to start pumping the stuff out again.
So in essence, you're saying this is part of manipulating prices?
I think that's a very, very important part of the picture which isn't being spoken about here. And the platinum industry is uniquely positioned to do that because of its monopoly of the actual resource in South Africa and the handful of companies which control it. The second point is about what's coming up at the policy conference with the state intervention in the mining sector's recommendations. These are actually pretty mild measures. They're a long way away from nationalisation. The resources rent tax will only kick in. It's a windfall tax. It will only kick in if profits go over a certain amount. So it's not as if for every single ounce of platinum which is produced, that the producers are going to be losing extra money in terms of this tax. They will only be using it if the world price goes over certain levels. And of course those windfalls would have then gone to the shareholders who very probably aren't even in this country but are connected to the international stock exchanges around the world where actually even these South African companies are listed. In other words, a huge amount of value which would be leaving the country, which is not being reinvested in the services and everything else that we so desperately need. Sure. So this resources rent tax is actually designed to make sure that a greater amount of this value, which comes from the country's minerals, remains within the country and is actually reinvested where there are social and economic priorities.
All right, let's do this, Dr. Kevin. Just hold the line. Don't put the phone down. Let's test some of the points that you've already raised. But let me start with the issue of you saying that the long-term picture looks pretty all right for this particular sector. Because if you say that on the basis of what is happening in China, people will say, but it's exactly the same thing that happened in Europe. A while ago, people were saying, well, Europe is stable and so on, so don't worry about the future. In other words, what I'm saying is that this industry needs to change its reliance on exports, whether it's in Europe or in Asia.
I completely agree with you on that, and that actually brings us back then to the second element of the recommendations of the state intervention in the mining sector, which Mr. Leon was also complaining about. He complained about the export tax, which was going to be put on raw mineral exports. Well, the reason why that they're recommending for there to be restrictions on raw mineral exports is precisely to force the development of the beneficiation industries within South Africa. In other words, that instead of just exporting the raw resource and all the value to be added somewhere else through the manufacturing processes, actually the domestic manufacturing industry itself will have to be stimulated, will have to grow, will create more value inside of South Africa, and most importantly of all, will create more jobs inside South Africa. So that's what's actually being talked about there. It recognises that it's actually part of a diversification strategy to move away from this primary commodity reliance, which of course is so problematic.
All right, let me bring in Mr. Dancy here on the issue of just the perfect timing of this crisis, so that this issue is discussed at the policy conference of the ANC. What do you think about that, Dancy?
Thank you, Xolani. Can I first address two issues before I come to that? Mm-hmm. The first one is the SIMS report.
Yeah.
Here, there was a debate about nationalization, or there is a debate about nationalization. And the market, the analyst, the commentators, and everybody said nationalization is not a way to go. And the ANC commissioned a study, and the study come up with a recommendation, and is not yet the policy.
Yeah.
And now people are already complaining about the SIM report, that the investors are jittery about this SIM report. And we are sitting with the problem of the lack of transformation in the mining industry. I wonder if all these comments are saying, let's continue with the mining industry which is not transformed. And surely we must not made to believe that that is what they are saying, because we cannot continue the way we are mining without any transformation. In terms of the timing,
but having said that, sorry to interrupt you, because having said that, I suppose you would want the stakeholders to comment on the SIMS report anyway, about some of the suggestions in the SIMS report, whether or not they agree with you.
But what I'm saying is that they must not say the SIMS report. The SIMS report is causing a jittery in the market. We must discuss what we are saying. We must discuss the mining industry. We must discuss about the future of the minerals in this country. So we mustn't get a sense that people are saying, let's not discuss anything related to transformation. That is tantamount to blackmail, and we cannot accept that.
All right, before you go to the second point, McMaster, you raised this issue of the Sims report, actually.
Yes, Xolani. I think Peter has mentioned all the specific issues related to the Sims report. I think in terms of, I think it's all and good that we're talking about all the economic factors, but we're talking. I think in terms of the short-term instability in the markets, the biggest potential consequence of that is retrenchment of workers. And in terms of that, I mean, we've already seen Marikana Full Shaft, Aquarius Platinum, we've seen Impala Platinum and Eastern Platinum already been retrenching workers. And
I know. But Dr. Gavin is raising doubts about the reasons why these things are happening. For instance, it's about manipulation of prices. You heard him make his presentation. So that's the issue, though. That are these issues being interrogated at all at this task team meeting that you attend?
Well, in terms of the task team that's been set up, and the task team will actually meet next week, but. The task team is looking at medium to long-term solutions for the instability in the platinum sector, and that's some of the issues that Dr. Gavin have referred to. But in the short term, that's a reality, as I said, that we will have to deal with is the retrenchment of workers, and we have to look at the people side. We have to look at the people side of this short-term instability.
Because here's the issue: it would be said if the retrenchment is happening as a proxy for a certain argument or a proxy for a certain discussion. In other words, you retrench people simply because you want people to think and discuss issues this way, when in reality the industry could have sustained and kept the jobs on.
Well, I think if you look at retrenchments, it's purely because of operational requirements. And currently, we know that there's an oversupply of platinum. We talked about ounces in the range of 400 to 500,000 ounces of oversupply into the platinum market. So currently, that has a huge bearing on the amount or the output that mines can actually produce. So. One of the aspects is probably to cut down on output, but that again will mean retrenchments in the market. And the human element related to all these short-term instabilities should be the main focus, not only the economic.
Mr. Dancy, I'm going to ask you to give me your second comment in a minute. But let me ask you, Dr. Gavin, again. Can retrenchments be avoided in the medium term?
I think absolutely yes. I think the key point to make is that this is about the mining companies defending their profits, doing what they have to do to defend their profits, and offloading the cost of that onto their workforce. Basically, they will quite happily open up or shut down production as market conditions shift, so that they in turn can try and shift those market conditions back into their favour of their profitability. And we should be very clear that the profits have been absolutely massive. Anglo Platinum, Impala, the others were making enormous profits hand over fist when the commodity really started taking off in the early 2000s, in the first boom from 2000 to 2008. If my memory serves me correct, Anglo Platinum became the first South African company to post a profit of over $1 billion in a year, and that was off of that platinum boom. So the profits have been absolutely enormous. And I think also within that context, I would argue actually that the mine workers have been hideously exploited in this industry, that they should be and are absolutely right to push for much higher wages, which basically means a much higher share of what's being produced, and that's going to come at the cost of shareholders, I'm afraid. But there has to be a more equitable distribution of wealth in this industry. And on the issue of retrenchments, if we're in conditions of oversupply, well, there's absolutely no need for retrenchments at all. What could happen, as I think the National Union of Mine Workers is pushing for, is that if there there are going to be slowdowns or closures, that those workers who are already there go onto training,
All right.
and that they're put onto schemes which are paid for by the companies, which can more than afford to pay for them. And if it's at the cost of their shareholders, tough luck shareholders, it's the workers who count.
All right, I need to take a commercial break, but here's another suggestion from Anthony, I suppose in relation to the situation of overproduction. He says, let the government buy production and hold it in reserve for later benefit. I'll hear what my guests have got to say about this. I'll also take one or two calls, 0891 10428, a couple of emails as well, that coming through in a short while.
The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
7 minutes now before 9, we're talking, remember, about the situation within the platinum sector, a crisis. And, of course, other analysts are saying that more shafts should be closed in order to make sure that there's a balance then with production. Let me quickly go to Hassan Logat on the line. Good morning, Hassan.
Hi. Xolani, they say that truth is always the first casualty in a war.
Yeah.
And I really, while I was waiting, I think Dr. Gavin spoke a lot of the things like the SMS earlier that I agree with. I think every time there's an initiative around democratizing the economy or putting pressure on the mining sector, look at the early 90s, you have this kind of reaction. So because we do not know enough, there's a lack of transparency how business works. We don't know taxation, double parity taxation, whatever else, double dealing. There are too many things that are unknown to the public eye, and our level of public debate on these issues are quite poor. So I really think, yes, there's a relation to the conference. Secondly, if there's a crisis, how come this is always unevenly borne by poor and working people? The CEOs, Cynthia Carroll and others, continue to take big salaries. Why is there no cut on their salaries and shareholders? Number three, why in these debates do we not have community voices? The communities have been promised a lot. The communities surrounding mining, and those who were relocated to make place for mining, have been promised homes, jobs, etc. But now they're living in poor quality homes. They never factored in these discussions.
All right, that's Hassan Logat. Again, let me bring you back here, Mr. Tansi. If what Dr. Gavin Caps is saying, for instance, and of course also Hassan Logat is saying, it changes the whole picture about why this crisis exists in the first place and how it should be solved.
No, I fully agree with both Dr. Gavin, Anthony, and Hassan. But let me first, before I respond to that, let me first go to my second point I wanted to make. The other problem we are facing with while we are discussing this issue is a question of safety stoppages, which Peter referred to. We know that we are sitting with the problem of the mining industry killing workers. And they have been complaining about Section 54s and Section 54s. And now that is coming very strong, that one of the issues that we must look at in order to address this problem is Section 54s. Now, that makes us to doubt as to whether they wanted to use this crisis to address grievances that they have been having against the government or against the workers. Our argument is you cannot use the Section 54 to address this crisis. Because in the first place, the reason why Section 54 is applied is because people have died. If people did not die, there can be no Section 54. So we want to make it clear that we are not going to entertain the Section 54s as one of the measures to address this problem.
Yeah,
and coming to the point of I wanted to address the issue of the Section 54 because and these are the statistics from the industry. For instance, they say of they were talking about Anglo Platinum. It was an example. Faced 81 safety stoppages last year. Of those, 54 were the results of non-fatal incidents, and that cost the company about 109,000 ounces of production. And they are complaining that some bureaucrats at least, are unnecessarily throwing around their weight. Even if there are non-fatal incidents, you cannot say they must be fatal before you stop the operation. What if you don't stop and people die?
Okay. All right. I'm running out of time. I just need to wrap up now on this issue. Perhaps starting again with you, Mr. Tansi. What should happen and what will happen going forward? Very briefly.
What we have discussed on Monday, we looked at a number of areas. One area we are looking at is to bring in the Reserve Bank to play part. to buy platinum as its strategic investment. We think that it can address the question of oversupply in the market.
Okay.
And the second point we are looking at is a question of beneficiation.
Right.
We've got the strategy, so all what we need to do is to benefice this platinum.
Okay.
It will avoid the oversupply of the market.
Mr. McMaster, I need to get a point from you to wrap up.
Just in terms of, I think in terms of medium to long-term solutions, Cliff has mentioned some of the options we're looking at in terms of engaging the cycle of instabilities and making the mining industry more sustainable. In the short term, however, as I mentioned earlier, the primary goal should be to protect the social well-being of workers and their surrounding communities.
All right, Dr. Gavin Capps, your quick last word for me.
Yeah, I'm completely in agreement, particularly with our friend from the National Union of Mine Workers. I think the recommendations are excellent. On the safety stoppages thing, well, they say they're stopping not for fatal accidents, but if you lose an arm or a leg, that's the end of your working life, and that's pretty tantamount to fatal anyway. These are very, very serious accidents. The health and safety record of the mining industry here is absolutely scandalous, and I'm glad they're stopping mines and they're making them safer places for people to work in.
All right, Dr. Gavin Capps, political economist at the University of Cape Town. Thank you. Here with me, Lee McMaster, Head of Sustainable Development at Solidarity. Thanks indeed. As well as Zweli Chatansi, NUM and National Education Secretary. Thank you all for coming through and talking to us this day. Thanks to the team, producers Collins Limawane, Meshu Shandlale and Wisane Makubele, technical producer Patrick Munana, senior producers Lungile Mabaso and Chili Titibase, Forum 8 producer Jake Mugoma, chief producer Butsi Lugoto, executive producers Aubrey Sechia and Busi Chana. Olana Gwala will be back again for you tomorrow, 6 to 9 here on SAFM. It is now 9 o'clock, and that means time for Morning Talk here on SAFM. 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 Morning